Raiders introduces a lot of new mechanics and has way more freedom with what you can get away with because of the PvE environment. But honestly, I think there's a good share of relic abilities and gadgets that might work well for the next mainline game. I mostly want to focus today's video on the gadget system. For a while, I've wanted the ability to have multiple subs in one game, but gadgets provide a great way to do that I've already seen discussed. Have two shares of sub weapons, one be normal subs with ink cost, and gadgets with a cooldown. This lets gadgets be a bit more powerful or creative while reducing overall spammability. Today, I want to focus on what I'd like to see and how I'd balance it. Today is not going to be focused on what exactly a kit system like that would look like, or a new system entirely preferably, but if you want to hear about that, do let me know. I might do a video on it in the future. That said, there's still two things I want to get out of the way. First one is spammability. With gadgets not having any cost, it is just extra things on the field if sub-weapons aren't adjusted. So I think across the board, most sub-weapons, but especially bombs, should have longer whiting frames, or the time before you can recover your ink tank. I don't even think that would be a bad thing, but it's worth pointing out. As for gadgets, my cooldown range for this video is going to be 7 to 15 seconds. Gadgets that can linger or have generally more power should have longer cooldowns, but those that are fast or more minimal should be shorter. It's a good way to balance them out and keep them more even, and I also think any gadget cooldowns longer than that time just wouldn't be practical with how fast Splatoon is. That said, here's a list of gadgets I'd like to see in multiplayer. First off is Spin Wheel, probably the easiest candidate because this gadget is actually just Seeker Reborn. It has pretty much all the DNA from that sub, which is basically an old version of Curling Bomb that can also home in on enemies and explode, costing a whopping 90% of the ink tank. Can you guess why it was bad? As a gadget, the base Spin Wheel honestly works pretty well. It travels in a straight line, will lock onto opponents, but instead of exploding, will travel a certain amount of time before exploding, piercing through enemies, which could do a reasonable amount of damage for combos, somewhere between like 50 to 70. And the explosion could just function like a normal lethal bomb with its explosion radius. All you'd have to do is just tone down the size of the gadget and the explosion afterward, but the size of the gadget should still be fairly large compared to a normal bomb. This also goes without saying, but pretty much every version of the gadgets we're going to be talking about is their base form with no upgrades. I think this gadget would function as an amazing alternate movement option, especially for sharking weapons, either paired with or to compensate for not having something like a curling or fizzy bomb. I would give this sub a 9-second cooldown. It does linger for a few seconds, but probably wouldn't be on the field that long, so this feels like enough of an opportunity to potentially go in with it or use it for poking without spamming too much. The next gadget is the one that inspired this video, the Splash It. I would absolutely love to see this. Spin Wheel still borrows a lot of its DNA from a normal bomb, and this is the first one that'll feel really unique. It's an up-close attack that is slow and laggy, but can allow you to get some big damage off with a one-shot range. On close-range weapons, it could be an extra movement option, like Dooley's using it after a dodge roll, and for long-range defensive options, it could be a threatening combat tool for players that go up close to it to be aware of. That said, Splash It has a lot balancing it out. It is very slow, both before and after the slash, which can put you in an awful position, especially for those more long-range weapons, or give less mobility to those that are quicker. This means it's a high-risk, high-reward tool. But that said, it would obviously still be very powerful. I think the hitbox would have to be a bit smaller horizontally, and it would probably have to be one of the longer cooldowns, somewhere around 13 seconds. Because I think that burning this gadget and being able to track it should be a big part of its skill expression, and it'd make timing a lot more important. That said, I think it'd be an incredibly fun tool to watch. Up next is High Fiber, another gadget that borrows a lot from an existing sub. And if it wasn't obvious, I 100% think they should just replace Line Marker. Shooting out 5 line markers is a really cool gadget utility, and while it's still going to be very hard to hit people, it does enhance the location effect of the sub. With 5 lines, people have to worry about being able to mark you. That said, the lines linger a stupidly long amount of time in Raiders, and here I think it should just be about 3 seconds, which is still a good bit longer than the normal dart. The cooldown for this should be a bit longer at about 11 seconds. This is because the lines do linger for 3 seconds, and if you're located, that can last up to 5 seconds, and because it's 5 lines, it's a huge presence on the stage, so it's definitely something that can't be too prevalent. That said, I think this would be a huge upgrade for Line Marker and a very powerful utility tool. Let's go back to movement for a second though, and talk about Dash Bomb. Now unfortunately, mobile tools are really hard to pick out for a mainline game because they can really mess with stage design for something like the Torque Screw or Jump Bomb. bomb, and other times they also overlap with an existing special, like Zipcaster is an obvious one. However, dash bomb I think would be really easy to fix. Since its movement is horizontal, there just isn't too much to balance around. The only thing you'd have to do is that if you use it and then you're in the air, you would cap out your movement speed at about a Dowser dodge roll range, since stage designs are already built around that. But what if you use it in the air? Well, this has another cool idea. I think it should allow you to descend to the ground just like you were using a dually. This could allow other weapons to use it as a quick descent option, which would add to your movement options. The base explosion on the dash bomb would probably just do about 35 damage, for some situational combo numbers, since mainly the utility for this is not really its bomb, but its dash ability, which would be really cool, and I think very fun to allow more mobility options in Splatoon 4. Given that this is something that doesn't linger a lot and is purely just a movement option, I would give it the smallest cooldown at just 7 seconds. This is an easy slam dunk to emphasize movement without contributing to spam at all, and as a side note, this would be especially useful for grates or uninkable surfaces. Let's step away from movement for a second and talk about a more interesting gadget, Tether Whale. Taking away Killer Whale and replacing it with a significantly more unique concept? What an easy choice. Having a placeable object that creates a damaging laser that connects to you is really creative to utilize. And since it reveals your location, it has a huge amount of risk reward. Since that location is such a huge downside, I'd actually like to start my changes with a buff. Instead of being placed right at your feet, the whale can now be thrown with the same velocity as Wavebreaker. This means it'd be much easier to set it up in ideal locations while still having a more limited throw range compared to that of a normal bomb. Being hit with the whale would just be about the same as being hit with a Killer Whale beam, and it would linger for 7 seconds instead of the obnoxious 10 ones, obviously. This change is both kind of necessary, but also would make it so that you're not located for too long. That said, it would also need a longer cooldown of about 14 seconds. That way it's down for about half of its overall duration. The high damage potential if you have a line between yourself and multiple opponents could make it very useful for certain teamfight situations. This is definitely the one that's the hardest to predict for a multiplayer setting, but I think there's a lot of tools to balance it, and it's just such an interesting idea that I'd love to see how people can utilize it in PvP. That said, I have one more gadget I want to talk about porting, the other mobility tool, because I really do want more mobility gadgets if it wasn't obvious, and that's Blast Boot. To me, a mini splashdown works far better design-wise as a sub, and I like the utility of it, but balancing it is a bit challenging. Obviously, the height and overall distance might have to be decreased a little bit, but the horizontal length should still be fairly noticeable. I also think that if you use it in the air, it'll probably just have to go straight to the ground, but that could be a mix-up in its own right. That said, the added mobility makes it a really cool gadget option, and since this is a sub-weapon option, it wouldn't have to kill, which I think would make it a lot more tolerable at lower levels. It should still do a lot of damage though, somewhere between 70 and 75 damage with a solid explosion size. This to me would have some overlap with Dash Bomb, but be a different utility, being a little bit more committal with a bit more playmaking power for those punishing it, but if you hit it, it's a lot easier to find your kills compared to something like a Dash Bomb. I would give it an 8-second cooldown, since again, it's very similar, but I really like the idea behind this and the interactions it would have between you and opponents. And maybe this doesn't need to be said, but since you can choose where you're moving with the splashdown, I don't think it'd be as predictable or easy to punish at high levels of play compared to what we have right now. Now, hold on a second, we talked about porting gadgets to Splatoon 4, but during this process we kind of turned Line Marker into one. Is there any other sub-weapon candidate to function as gadgets? I think there's quite a few, but I want to bring up one main option that I think fits this particularly well, and that's Splash Wall. The unique utility Splash Wall provides is honestly more comparable to a gadget than anything else, since it still has the power behind it to be useful on a cooldown compared to something smaller like a beacon or a sprinkler. More importantly, Splash Wall has some issues when it comes to the ink cost system. A lot of wall weapons are just too ink hungry to use Splash Wall consistently, and it makes it an underutilized toolkit of things like X-Washer, for example. While a certain non-ink hungry main weapon forces frequent one-sided interactions by spamming it. No matter which way you go, Wall is just a little bit irritating as a sub. By putting it as a gadget, it has a cooldown, fixing both of these issues. Smart use cases can take heavy advantage of it, especially since it won't use any more of your ink tank anymore, but because you only have one of them per certain amount of time, it's now about smart use cases to take advantage of it alongside a sub and with the lack of ink cost. But once one has been taken down, there's a lot of downtime for people to take fights with you without your wall. I would give this around a 10 or 11 second cooldown, since it has some linger potential and downtime is important. Again, especially since you get a sub weapon alongside this now. And that is every idea I have for gadgets in Splatoon 4. But before I wrap things up, there's a few relic powers that I think are worth mentioning and just don't fit in their own video. Gadget Recovery Up can very easily be a stackable ability, up to 30% reduction just like in Raiders. Squid Roll and Surge Attack was also in side order, and I think would fit great as a main exclusive ability. It could do around 35 damage and be a nice combo option. My favorite relic power that gets outclassed really early on, sadly, is the Mid-Air Jump, and I'd love to see that just be a default ability, not even tied to gear. Remove the damage zone and keep it on the smallest version, and it would be really nice for added movement options to make Splatoon 4 gameplay even more distinct. I can't emphasize enough that you can literally change directions in the air with Squid Roll. It would be so cool in PvP. Oh, and one more thing. Not a relic power, but Speed Tank has a bonus where it paints under you. That could be a cool mechanic for a certain special, but I also think it should be a mechanic of Squid Surge. Imagine the added utility for more vertical stages if Squid Surging allowed you to turf the wall as you were surging up it. It would make the ability way more practical. That's all the gadgets and relic perks I want to see in the next game. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want to see a video on more original gadget and sub-weapon ideas. I'll see you all next time.